greet me at the door. They go to Walmart.
Thank you. All right, we have just two matters of business to take care of today. One, we had a lengthy discussion on Senate Bill 212 with presentations by the author and other witnesses the other day. I had three other people that wanted to be heard on that bill, and then I'm going to run through it with the amended changes that we discussed at the meeting the other day, and then we will see whether the committee wants to take action or not. So if you look in your folders, you will see it's actually the second item in there. There's a Senate research summary of Senate Bill 212, and then you will see the bill itself, the original bill, and then you will see the substitute that's LC 365235S. That's what we're going to be talking about here first. So I'm going to recognize several folks that have signed up to be heard on this bill. I believe all the committee members now have had time to review the committee sub, and we will go over the changes that we discussed the other day. So I will call first Mr. Paul Smith from Citizen Impact to be heard. If you'll come to the podium and let us know your thoughts on SB 212.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Paul Smith. I'm Executive Director of Citizen Impact. We are a network of pastors and faith leaders across the state of Georgia. Just this past February 15th, in fact, our organization hosted over 100 pastors and faith leaders from all across Georgia right here at the General Assembly, and I think several members of this committee had the opportunity to hear directly from pastors in their districts. And overwhelmingly, our position is to say no to any expansion of state-sponsored gambling here in Georgia. Whenever I speak to this issue, I try to say something a little different than what I've said in past times about this, and I know our friends who also have expressed opposition have done a good job quoting statistics and other factors involved in this, but I think it goes without saying that there's the negative impact on mental health that comes with state-sponsored gambling. I know that some are just for horse racing, not for other forms of gambling, but I also think it goes without saying that one step towards expansion of gambling leads to further steps towards other types of gambling. And then we hear often that it should just be up to the citizens to decide, let them vote. That's typically not the worst argument, I suppose, but our concern is that our nonprofit groups that oppose this would never be able to compete in terms of advertising and other funds that will be spent to convince the citizens of Georgia to vote for this measure. So we just want to express our opposition to any more state-sponsored gambling.
Any questions for Mr. Smith? All right, thank you for
Thank
your
you.
testimony today. Mr. Taylor, how you pronounce that? Hawkins.
Seems I need to take a spelling lesson because I've spelled it wrong the last couple of times or something.
It's more
Regardless of
penmanship.
that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Appreciate the opportunity to testify on this issue. We appreciate the changes that have been made to this legislation, but we're also going to be unequivocal about the fact that this legislation doesn't work for Georgia. Across the country, we've seen racetracks closing without the support of the predatory gaming machines, and if those in Georgia should be successful without these machines, we're talking about creating a new section of the population that is addicted to the gambling that they provide with parimutuel betting. I do believe I handed out a sheet the last time I was here. I hope y'all had a chance to at least glance at that, and it detailed some of the horrible negative influences, or impacts rather, of gambling expansion across the states. The whole United States of America, every state that tries gambling expansion sees dramatic increase in social services costs, and it's estimated that at a minimum for every $1 increase in the public coffers of the tax revenue that comes from various gambling expansions, you have another $3 in social services that the state ends up having to pay. So that's just one of the considerations. Also wanted to mention this, a new statistic I was able to find, that when an adult gambles for the first time, it doubles their possibility to become a problem gambler in the future. And as I mentioned last time, we're not talking about, we're not, it's not our position that everyone who gets involved in horse racing or anything else becomes an addicted gambler. Obviously, that's not true. But a small percentage of those who do gamble, who do bet, become addicted to that opportunity to get something for nothing, to bet on the odds and make it big. And when an adult gambles for the first time, it doubles their possibility, as I mentioned a moment ago, to become a problem gambler in the future. So bringing another location to our state, another opportunity for gambling, does mean an increase in addicted gamblers. And then finally, I wanted to mention that according to Emory University bankruptcy report, bankruptcies in the states increase by an average of 18 to 42% with each major gambling location built in the state. So these are some facts, some statistics. I believe some of these are on the sheet that I handed out. Trust y'all will get a chance to look at that. There are numerous health consequences as well. Has the highest concussion rate of any sport in the United States. And there are, as I say, there are health reasons, bankruptcy reasons, other social reasons why we will be unequivocal in our opposition to this. But as I mentioned before, I do appreciate the changes that have already been made to this legislation. So thank you for the opportunity to testify, Mr. Chairman.
Are there any questions for Mr. Hawkins? I will point out to you there is a provision in this that there are designated revenues to be applied towards the treatment of problem gambling with the anticipation that there will be some percentage of the population, if this were to pass, that will have problems with this. And
Yes, sir.
I was insistent that be in the bill so that we'll help
We certainly
anybody
do.
that develops those problems.
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. We appreciate that.
Thank you. There are no questions.
All right. Appreciate it.
All right, Mr. Mike Griffin, Georgia Baptist Convention.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Mike Griffin, Public Affairs Representative, Georgia Baptist Convention. And again, just want to register once again our opposition to the expansion of any gambling in our state. Georgia Baptists have 21 times since 1963 our messengers have went on record as opposing any expansion of gambling. We do represent over 1 million citizens in our state, over 3,000 churches. And our concern, while, as I said yesterday, this would probably be the lesser of three evils if you're talking about sports betting and casinos, pure pari-mutuel betting as it is. My concern, however, is what it has been for the last 8 or 9 years when it started out as pure pari-mutuel betting in these early Senate committees when we dealt with this. It ends up being a gateway to other forms of gambling. And I can pretty much guarantee you that, we're going to be dealing with additional things related to Indian reservations wanting to come in. You're going to look at additionally looking at destination resorts, casinos coming in. I'm just saying it typically one thing will lead to another. And while it's very commendable at the respect of how you're trying to restrict this, unfortunately, as I said yesterday, it is a slippery slope. And once Class 3 gambling becomes legal here, the consequences of others are going to increase. As I mentioned also yesterday, and somebody sent me this, that 45% of all racetracks have closed. 63% of those closed tracks closed in the last 20 years. And over 71% of the surviving tracks have casinos attached to them. So this is just some of the history that I've heard about over the last few years. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. We got a question from my Vice Chairman, Senator Brass. Welcome back, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and glad I can restore order and decorum to this great committee, august body. I got a question. So Tuesday, in my absence, we passed out the constitutional amendment. That's correct, right?
Yes, sir.
And so my question to you was, if that goes to the floor, it passes, goes to the people, they vote for it, which I know y'all oppose, and I'm not questioning that in any way, but should that pass, do you think we'd be better off to go ahead and have some of these provisions lined up, or do you think it'd be better to vote against this and wait and see? I mean, to me, because from what I heard from Taylor, was, the provisions, and you kind of alluded to it as well, that the provisions are good provisions, but so, or make it better anyway, I guess I should say. And so I guess my question is, do you think if that's going to move forward, should we go ahead and have some regulations lined up now, and instead of waiting, if we waited, say, a year, I mean, we don't know what the political landscape's going to look like next year, and next year they may come back and not want any of these provisions in there and just leave it wide open. So,
Well, categorically, if you're dealing with any type of constitutional amendment that is going to impact regulations, you certainly would want the people to know what that second step's going to look like.
Okay.
And so that is commendable no matter what the resolution is. Our concern is that horse racing is not on an island by itself.
Right. No, I get your concern.
You understand that point of it. And again, those same concerns, but that is to be commended that you're trying to do that. My understanding is that you have to do that in the Senate. I don't know that you have to always do that in the House. And we don't know what this legislation is going to look like when it goes over there.
That's true.
It could be amended to add all this stuff back in it, which I know y'all apparently will not be for, or it seems like. But I'm just saying, I think once this kind of gets out in the field, I don't know if you're going to be able to bring it back into the pen again.
Horses out of the barn.
You could use that terminology. Or the
Thank you.
camel's nose under the tent, but, probably not going to raise camels. But anyway.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions? All right, thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for being with us today. That's all the comments that people have asked to make. This issue's been around for a while. We went through it pretty thoroughly the other day. I'm going to review with you in your folder. There is a long legal size piece of paper that is the contents of the additional substitution committee sub. Rather than redraft the entire thing, Senator Kennedy is going to propose this as an amendment, and what it does is clarify just a few different things. He may want to speak to it, but I'll mention first. It was pointed out that it was some question exactly what percent the tax would be. It was going to be 3.5% was the intent, but it said something along the lines of 3.5 of 1%. Was a little bit confusing, so that's been cleared up. As it turns out, we went ahead and added in the money for problem gaming too, and you'll see here under subparagraph 3 on your front page says 3 3/4%. That's the amount that's going to be held in a separate account by the commission, which is going to be the Horse Racing Commission, and on a quarterly basis it will be sent in essentially to our state treasurer in a separate account, the Horse Racing for Georgia account. So that'll be the taxes derived from all the bets placed from the pool of bets, and that'll be to the state to be used for those purposes we approved in the constitutional amendment yesterday, and that's why it's listed in this way here. You'll look up above and you'll see under B the perpetual wagering pool. That is sometimes referred to as the handle, the total of amount of bets made. 5% of that will go for purses for the winners, the participants in the races, the horses, the horse owners that race. And then you'll have various other amounts. Basically, I guess that's, somebody do the math. What's 1 1/500%? 1.15? And we're going to say, you'll see the different accounts that goes to for breeders' incentives to be used for the promotion of equestrian racing and breeding through the College of Veterinary Medicine. Some will go for racing horse retirement. So these horses, when they quit racing, will be distributed out to people that want them and will take care of them. Some will go for the prevention of animal cruelty as well as treatment of abused animals. There's some opposition to horse racing because of the injuries that many of these horses sustain, and then the remainder, other than the tax, will go to the facilities that operate these venues. You will note on the top of the second page that designates what the funds held in the Horse Racing for Georgia account. That's our tax revenues go into that account, will be used for education, health care, rural development programs, including broadband, and problems to prevent and treat compulsive or addictive betting or gambling. So that's That's where the funds will be spent. That's specified in the constitutional amendment and reflected. This makes it clearly reflected in the enabling legislation. So that's the Senate Bill 212. You'll also see Senator Ginn had raised a suggestion that we clarify there not be a cap on the amount of tax taken from the export signal racing revenue, which is simulcast revenue. It's 0.625%. That's industry standard, and that will just go to our general fund for whatever purposes used. It will not be capped at $1 million like the original substitute provided for. I'm going to let you add anything you'd like to that explanation, Senator Kennedy. It's your amendment. You had a couple of clarifications, and I'm not sure if I touched on them.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, I think you touched on all of them and explained what the concern was with the sub yesterday. And Mr. Chairman, did you happen to mention that typo at the top of the page?
No, I think
y'all
you're
would
going to need a friendly amendment on that.
Okay. For those on the committee, if you'll look at the top of this amendment, it says replacing lines 536 to 5638. The 8 is an extra. That shouldn't be
No,
there.
the 3's extra. It should be 568.
Oh, the 8, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. This is an amendment. He presented this to me within 24 hours prior to the meeting. Rather than building a committee sub, poor Sean Marie's been swamped. Yeah, excuse me. I want to make sure we understand what we're doing first, but that'll be fine.
Thank you, Mr.
I
Chairman.
want to make a couple of comments. That there was, some confusion, I think, or hard to get our arms around exactly what this does. If this enabling legislation is to pass in conjunction with the constitutional amendment, first of all, it allows the citizens of Georgia to decide whether we will permit parimutuel betting on horses in this state. Our Constitution currently prohibits that. It requires a constitutional amendment. There's no dispute or debate about that issue. But this constitutional amendment has built it in where this will be only horse racing and simulcast of other live horse races going on at the same time in other locations. That these activities will only be at the tracks, the horse racing facilities that are approved by a horse racing commission. There can be up to 5 tracks that could be approved and licensed. Anywhere in the state of Georgia, there is no geographical limitation, no distance requirements between the facilities, and there will be, no requirement to be within so close to the airport. We're going to let the free market work that out. It may be nobody ever comes and wants to do a horse racing track here because they don't think it's economically viable without other forms of gambling. Time will tell. It may be there are 10 of them that want to come. It may just be 1 or 2 that are willing to make the type of investment necessary to open and operate one of these facilities. But if the people of Georgia agree that that would be permissible, then the Horse Racing Commission will make those decisions. No more than 5 tracks in the state. The other thing that is just crystal clear here is there will not be any type of slot machines, like we heard the term racinos, and that's going to be true whether you call them a historical racing machine, whether you call them a co-am machine, or whether you call them a slot machine. Those will not be permitted, and no other forms of gambling will be permitted at these facilities, these venues. It is a rifle shot laser focus for one type of gambling activity that is currently prohibited by the Constitution. There's also a provision in this committee sub that says any racetrack awarded to whatever location, let's just say it's Savannah, Chatham County, must have the approval of the local governing authorities, either through an ordinance or a resolution of the county commission, before that type of activity can take place in your area. So there are parts of Georgia that are more conservative than others, and that this offends their moral sensibilities. Even if the state as a whole were to agree to this amendment, it will not be imposed on any local communities. No racetracks would be built unless the local governing authorities has an ordinance or a resolution permitting that. And their various type of zoning ordinances, et cetera, will be honored and complied with. That's just some of the big picture view. We heard some language that I had difficulty getting my arms around as we talked about it, but one is this racing or betting pool. in the industry is called the handle. That's the total amount of bets made. And that includes live bets made right at the track by people that go there to watch the race and place their bets. Or also people that while at that track are betting on other races around the country that you can see simulcast or on the video monitors. You can bet on other races in other states. That goes into the pool. And likewise, these racetracks might allow other places in the country to film and to show our races as they occur live and to place bets on them. And that's why you heard some testimony that sometimes up to 90% of the income comes from out of state. So there may be people in other states that are betting on the Georgia Peach Downs or whatever you want to call our track here. You know, they may be placing bets that they're viewing it live somewhere else, but it goes into our pool and we get the 3 3/4% tax off of that. And that's part of how this industry is working now. The combination of the resolution, the constitutional amendment, and the enabling legislation prohibits these type of betting activities off-site. That has to occur at the racetrack. We're not going to ever permit, unless the Constitution changes, we're not going to be permitting off-track betting where there are betting parlors like you see in New York City where you can go watch and place your bets. You got to go to the track. And so that's kind of the encapsulation of what we're talking about here. Are there questions for me or for Senator Mullis, who's the subject matter expert and the sponsor, or Senator Beach, that's his assistant, Senator Hickman, who raises horses and is very familiar with the industry, or anybody else here? If any committee members are confused, I want to make sure we know where we're going. All right, I don't see any. You got a question?
My comment, that'd be okay. One, thank you for shepherding this issue. I know we've talked about it for a couple of years, actually. And also want to thank Senator Beach for, again, he's a foundation and we're standing on his shoulders. Sorry, I've gained a little weight, but but I appreciate the work that we've all done on this and the back and forth to make sure we get it so we can move it forward. So thank you for that.
All right. Well, with those comments, then, a motion concerning our substitute to Senate Bill 212, LC 365235S would be in order. Mr. Pro Tem, I recognize you.
Move do pass, and before I
Yeah, he'll
speak to that, I'd like to thank you for the clarity and detail that you've covered in this matter and in others. Very appropriate. Thank
Lucas
you.
is your second guy. Trying to save you.
Is there a second?
Lucas.
Second by Senator Lucas. All right, now, Senator Kennedy, you have a proposed amendment. Now it will be in order to offer that before we take action on this. Yours or any other proposed amendments?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would offer for the committee's consideration what you have, the two-page document that the chairman discussed, the amendment to substitute SB 212 LC 365235S as in Sierra, with the one change at the very top regarding the plate replacing the lines as discussed.
Okay, so it'd be 536 to 568 from the
Yes.
original substitute.
Yes, sir.
All right, we got a second to that?
Yes.
Second by Senator Albers. All right, we'll take up the amendment first. Any discussion of Senator Kennedy's amendment? All right, all in favor, raise your hand. And are there any opposed? All right. Senator Butler, is that hand still up because you're opposed, or was that just hadn't taken it down from voting yes? All right. Right. Well, so now we're in order. As amended, you have a motion do pass with the amendment. Is there any discussion on that? This is Senate Bill 212. Senator Lucas, got comment? It's already been moved and amended, so all in favor, raise your hand. All right. Are there any opposed? Senator Tippins. All right, it passes. What is that, 9-1 or 10-1? All right, 10-1. All right, thank you. We'll move on to our second order of business. SB 492. Senator Mullis, I want you to present, and you're welcome to take the podium, or you can do it from your seat if you'd like to. All right. While he is taking his seat up front, we're going to direct you to your folders. You'll see the Senate Research Summary. There'll be two summaries in there. The original bill is SB 492, but you'll see a substitute prepared by Senator Mullis and presented to me. This is actually his fourth attempt at it, if I'm not mistaken. Substitutes, and this one is LC 365224S. Everybody got that? All righty, proceed.
I'm not sure if I have it. Hang on a second, please. I got it.
All right.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but I've had a few bills this year.
I've seen
So,
58 so far, but I might have missed a couple.
Actually, I think it's like 47.
Oh,
But I'm
sorry.
trying to get 50 before it's over with. I just feel like I'm Alan Powell in the Senate. All right, I'll get serious now. Mr. Chairman, this is all about electric vehicle charging equipment. And as we all know, we have an electric car company coming to Georgia, going to provide thousands of jobs and thousands of vehicles. And already the movement is to move toward electric vehicles. Now, not in my family, but in a lot of families. So I think we need to prepare for that. Now, I'll be staying at Atlantic Station, and there's a lot of Tesla, for lack of a better word, plug-ins. Not for the other vehicles, just for that vehicle. And I'm thinking if we're going to have this trend in our country and our state of electric vehicles, we need a competitive way of selling energy to these vehicles. And if, my mantra is private enterprise and competition, and not for the price to be distributed through my grandmother paying it through her electric bill. It needs to be done on those convenience stores, or maybe in the malls, or wherever outside the mall, not inside the mall, but wherever that people park and want to recharge their vehicle while they shop or while they just recharge their vehicle to move on forward. So this bill is about that. Now, that's the synopsis of what we're looking at. The devil's in the detail, and we're going to tell you that now. I would like to bring my expert witnesses up, and I'll be here to answer all the tough questions, but for the easy ones, if that's okay with you, Mr. Chairman.
That'll be fine.
All
Let's
right.
see who we got signed up. Do you have somebody in particular you need to assist?
Well, Miss Lindell.
Assistance in presenting it first?
Miss Lindell and whoever she has with her.
All right. I'm going to let her take the podium then so we can
Okay.
see her on TV.
Go up there.
Mr. Chairman, hi.
Hey, Terry.
We have Jay Smith with Charge Ahead Partnership, and he's the subject matter expert.
All right.
Besides me, yes, sir. That would be correct.
Mr. Jay Smith, introduce yourself and give us
Did
your
she give
thoughts
you
or
stuff for
explanation of the
tonight?
bill.
Okay.
Will do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Jay Smith, Executive Director of the Charge Ahead Partnership, which is a consortium of businesses, associations, and individuals advocating for policies that will expand the development of the EV charging network. Our organization represents gas stations, convenience stores, truck stops, and grocery stores, many of the very same businesses that today offer fuel for gas-powered vehicles who would like to do the same thing for EVs. With so many car manufacturers shifting their production towards more EVs, we are expecting a significant increase in the EVs on our roads. However, if the EV market is going to really take off, we must answer the question that looms in many people's minds: where am I going to charge? Sometimes referred to as range anxiety, this fear of not making it to my destination on a charge is actually a valid concern. The majority of EV drivers today currently charge their cars at home with low-speed chargers, and that may work for daily commuters who have access to a plug. But home chargers that take 8, 10, and sometimes even longer to charge a car are not a long-term solution. And many of the same publicly available chargers that we see today are these slow chargers. Georgia needs a vast network of accessible, affordable, and strategically located high-speed charging stations. Recharging your vehicle should be as simple as it is getting gas today. And so the question is, why isn't it that simple? Companies like the ones I represent already have the real estate in the most convenient locations for drivers, have the amenities drivers want, and have a system of transparent pricing that drivers have come to expect. So why hasn't that same industry placed EV chargers at their locations that dot every interstate and every major intersection? Unfortunately, there are two primary barriers to companies getting into the EV charging business. First, they simply cannot compete with power companies that are able to subsidize their costs of the EV chargers and the electricity to recharge with money from ratepayers. Second, the rate structure for EV charging, which includes substantial fees, often called demand charges, is not workable for businesses to recoup those costs from EV drivers, especially when the power companies operating EV chargers themselves don't pass that same cost on to the EV driver. Senate Bill 492 seeks to address these problems and removes the obstacles in the way of private investment stepping up to the plate to bring more EV charging stations to Georgia. This is not an anti-utility bill. This is a pro-consumer, pro-driver piece of legislation. It brings competition and consumer choice to the EV charging industry. And the bill has three components. First, the legislation allows for the sale of resale by non-utility third-party electric vehicle charging operators. This bill does not favor any particular group or entity, gas stations, convenience stores, grocery stores, or even just an entrepreneur who wants to resell electricity for EV charging can do so without being deemed a utility company under the jurisdiction of the PSC. And I think most people in this room would agree with this provision of the bill. Second, the legislation also requires an electric supplier to file a tariff with the PSC specifically for EV charging. The current rate structure, as I mentioned, makes it economically impossible for private third parties to offer EV charging. The bill simply states that EV charging tariff cannot discriminate and must be competitively neutral to create a level playing field. And third, the legislation protects ratepayers from being forced to subsidize the cost of EV charging equipment, ownership, and operations. As I mentioned, right now, the power company is able to hike the power bill of its ratepayers in order to subsidize the cost of EV charging stations. There are private companies who are willing to take on those costs and make that investment. We should create a regulatory environment where it makes sense for them to do that. And as important it is to know what the bill does, I think it's important also to look at what the bill does not do. The bill does not prevent a utility from owning and operating EV chargers. This bill is all about a level playing field. If a public utility wants to open charging stations, they can do so, but it should be done under the same rates, terms, and conditions as the rest of the EV charging industry. And we believe this can be best done as a separate, unregulated entity to ensure that all of each EV charging providers, including the power companies, are operating under the same rules. Only through a separate subsidiary can we have a fair and level playing field.
Okay.
Second, this bill does not actually set the rate or the tariff. That still remains with the Georgia Public Service Commission. And third, this bill does not affect the 40-plus EMCs and the municipal electric suppliers in Georgia. The PSC does not have jurisdiction over those co-ops and municipalities, so this bill does not include them. In conclusion, I want to say that the folks that I represent are ready to step forward and make that investment, and we just need the framework to make it possible. I want to thank you for your time today, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Without this legislation, can gas stations, convenience stores, other people sell electricity or electric power to the cars that want to be recharged?
Not without this piece of
So
legislation.
right now, when you go to these charging stations, they're free services being provided by good citizens?
They're either, a lot of these charging stations, you may go to like a Marriott and stay at their hotel, and they will offer that as a customer service for staying in their hotel. It's important to remember a lot of those are the slow chargers, so it may cost that hotel, $4 overnight for somebody to charge. They kind of just bake that into their costs. They're not selling it by the kilowatt hour to the EV driver.
Right. Recognize Senator Albers for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate your presentation. I've been hearing a lot about public interest chargers. Can you explain that to me?
Sure. Usually the idea of a public interest charger is usually in the context of rural areas. Like, what about areas that may not be served? And so should we have something like a public interest charger that maybe does not fall under some sort of free market principles here? And I would say that the free market will come and serve the customers if left to actually work. If you look back at the horse and buggy transition to electric, to gas-powered vehicles, the gas stations came. I can speak to the fact that the convenience stores are in the rural areas already. We have the real estate. I have statistics about, how close, 86% of rural Americans live within 10 minutes of a convenience store, and 60% live within 3 miles of one. And it's also important to note that we have an incentive to come to rural areas because we're not just serving people that live in rural areas. EV drivers are driving through vast miles of rural area to go from an urban area to another urban area where range anxiety is still an issue and they're going to need to recharge. So we believe that the free market at work, as it has in the past, will come to these areas, and that we don't need to carve out a public interest EV charging station.
Thank you.
Mr. Smith, thank you for being here. You said currently without this legislation, you could not sell the electricity for electric cars, but isn't it true there's charging stations all over Georgia today that are doing it based on time? So they're selling the electricity, but just not measuring it by the kilowatt. They're doing it by time.
Yes, there are places where you can, again, most of them are slow chargers, but you can sell, like for parking, and it basically the use of the parking space to charge. So there is a transaction happening where people are charging. Again, most of those relate to the slow chargers, and I think what we're trying to, the future is where we can do this much more quickly.
But isn't the fact that they're slow chargers only a decision by the store owner or the property owner? They could upgrade to the fast charger the same way, just pay, they would have to charge more probably for the time because it's going to consume more kilowatts, right?
Yeah, and that's what I refer to, like the current rate structure that is set up with a demand charge. If you, and I could get specific numbers, but in a convenience store, if you were to upgrade, make the, first of all, the investment of $75,000 to $125,000 for the fast EV charger, so there's that cost that we have to bake into that cost that the power company is rate basing. But the actual cost to the convenience store in their electric bill because of the demand charge could go up, $600-800 for that month. And if they have very few people charging at this infancy in the market, that hundreds of dollars passed along to those 3 drivers makes it not feasible. And so that's why we're looking for a rate structure that it actually works for EV drivers.
If you're concerned about the peak demand, would that not also apply to the businesses around the area and the residents? If this EV industry really takes off like they're projecting it to, aren't we going to put a huge strain on the infrastructure of the power companies, which the peak demand would also be impacted because of the huge impact of the EV chargers? Wouldn't that have the same effect on all the other users on the current infrastructure?
Well, if I understand
what I'm asking you,
I think so. And what I would say is, absolutely, there's going to need to be upgrades to the, as Americans are using more electricity, whether it's for EVs or more phones or whatever,
Right.
people are using EVs. There's absolutely, this is really 2 good industries that need to be working together. There is a make-ready side of the equation of getting the grid generation created and distribution to the facilities. That's a growing issue. And that is, as it is with everything else, that is rate-based. What we're talking about is then when it gets to the station, let's just say a gas station, and we want to actually make the private sector invest our capital of $100,000 for a charger, a fast charger. We want to make that investment, and we want to then sell it without having to compete against the power company who is able to buy that EV charger paid for by, I think somebody mentioned their grandmother, like the rate payers.
so you're not against the demand charges, you just don't want to have to compete against the power company who doesn't pay the same demand charge? So
That's
you'd be
why
okay
we
with the demand charges if the power company wasn't competing with you?
Well, no, we feel like in order for the demand charge to make sense for, that demand charge should be captured in the make-ready side of it.
And who would pay that?
That's part of upgrading the grid. That's part of what is going to be needed, and that's the part that all of the electricity that we use, that is rate-based.
So then you would apply that charge across the spectrum to all residential and commercial customers?
Probably, at least initially, while they're upgrading the grid, that will have to happen. But I will say, as the market grows and as more and more EV charging, more EVs get out on the road, it makes then sense for, then it isn't necessarily a barrier to entry when that can be shared by EV drivers. But we can never get into that market and get into that business as long as, the current structure exists, when it's only a regulated industry that is able to do that and already pass that on.
Thank you.
We're trying to level the playing field in essence.
Yes, I would. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to say the evolution of anything from when they first put poles in the yard at TVA for just the power grid to begin, or any major adjustment when it comes to how business is done or new products in the industry. Whoever's got the power at this point would have to upgrade eventually, or whatever the evolution is. And even with that, let's say that we pass this bill and we have charging stations everywhere, they're still going to be making their money from the fee or the electricity that is sold. Now, what we're talking about is also when they charge somebody for that power, everybody that has their power grid pays for it, not just a consumer. So there's a lot of unbalanced playing field there. We think eventually the competition can offset that as well. And especially if we're doing it by the power, I can't think. Kilowatt, thank you. Couldn't think of that for a second.
Senator Brass, you have a question for the witness?
Sure, and this may go to Chairman Mullis as well, but just one thing, Jay, you had mentioned was you said if Marriott's providing the service and they have the charging stations and they're billing them into the rate, or they're rolling those costs into their rate, that's pretty much what Georgia Power's doing. That's what rate-based is, correct? And if they're customers, you mean like the people stay at their hotel? Correct. In essence, that's what they're doing. So in essence, it's not complete apples to apples. I get that, and I'm not going to argue against that point at all. But I guess my biggest hang-up on this whole thing, especially when we talk about rate-based, is that we, the government, by way of the PSC, went to Georgia Power and said, we need this infrastructure, and we're going to allow you to do it this way, doing rate-based. And now, all of a sudden, we're going to say, no, you can't. And so we're kind of moving the goalpost on them. And in my understanding, without talking directly with the PSC on this, but my understanding was it was to kind of get them to move towards some of our unserved and underserved areas. And so it kind of helped me get unwound there. That's my concern. Number one is we're moving the goalpost on them when we went to them asking for help. And then number two, what can we do to ensure that some of these unserved and underserved areas are going to be served, which that's not as big a concern as me, because there's a gas station or convenience store just about in every community out there. So that's not the biggest concern for me. But my number one concern is that we, the government, state government, went to them and said, we need your help, and now we're going to say, no, thank you. And that's in the form of a question.
And who is it directed to? Mr. Smith?
Either one. I mean,
you go ahead and I'll come.
I'll say so. The legislation, I think you may hear from Georgia Power, I think they have 57 fast chargers that are out there. This legislation doesn't require them to pull those out. This is forward-looking. Money that they have invested and put into building EV chargers, fast EV chargers that we're talking, remains. We're not saying that, that they have to pull those out, or that all of a sudden they have to pay back that money to the ratepayers. So to that sense of afraid of losing an investment that they've already made, this legislation doesn't touch what they've done. It is really, and there's a date, I think, in August or something, it's forward-looking.
Okay. So the 57 or however many they got right now, 1,700 that are out there. They're
And if they want to build one tomorrow, it would be exempt as well. There's a forward date on that.
Mr. Chairman, can I add? Thank you, and Mr. Chairman, thank you for that question. But on moving the goalposts, I think is again the evolution of business. They're going to have to move the goalposts, and also, I mean, we're used to the goalposts being moved too with Plant Vogel. I mean, that continues to change. That we gave them the permission through a bill that I voted for a long time ago, so that's going to happen. And with the number of convenience stores you mentioned, it's going to flood the area in South Georgia and other places of them wanting to get involved before the electric car really hits their area, which I'm sure it's already done it.
And Senator Brass, if I may add one thing about your second question about the serving the areas that you may think that we're not headed to, and that's one of the reasons why I think there's urgency to this legislation. Georgia is poised to receive $135 million from the federal government for EV charging infrastructure. And using that kind of money to incent faster deployment into these underserved or areas that you may think we may not get to is a great use of that money. But we think it's best when it can be offered to as many players as possible to say, hey, we'll take that money and we'll apply to use it in these locations, and the state actually gets to decide how they allocate that money, and they can actually decide that should go to rural areas or underserved areas or low-income communities or whatever they think that the private sector won't do. But I would say, why turn your nose up to the millions and tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars that the private sector is willing to pay in many of throughout the state.
Okay, Senator Brass.
I agree with you, and I think you kind of sparked something here. I think it's really a new industry we're talking about, and it's important. I do think it's important that we get it right. Anytime, it's always tough when we create a new industry with legislation and trying to back it up. So I certainly think we need to make sure we get this thing right.
Thank you.
Tell me about the $135 million. Where'd that come from? Is it available? And
Yeah, the federal infrastructure bill that the Biden administration passed, I guess about 2 months ago, included $7.5 billion for EV infrastructure. A portion of that, $2.5 billion, has already been allocated to, and I say allocated, let me finish it, 2 states. Georgia, based on population and things like that, was allocated $135 million of that. The process now is the state has until August to file an application and tell the federal government how you're going to use that $135 million. And I will say, the legislation very specifically at the federal government even says, because the folks that I represent also are part of that, saying it has to be allocated in a way that promotes private investment. You don't just want to give it, you want to do it in a way that encourages more investment into that. And so Georgia will be putting together their application due in August to how it's going to spend that $135 million in order to receive it.
Does this bill have anything to do with that money or the availability to us?
It does not, other than the fact that if this bill passes, it will probably give Georgia more flexibility in its application and plan about how it's going to spend it. Because
our Constitution let us spend it on private businesses to subsidize their build out of chargers. What about
I'm not a constitutional attorney on Georgia's Constitution, but the federal legislation specifically is written to encourage private investment.
I had a question from Senator Redd. I'm going to allow him first. He was recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, but I think you asked the question I was thinking about.
Senator Gooch.
I was just going to follow up with the gentleman's comments. He's correct. The state will have until August 1st to develop a plan. GDOT will be working on that. The money's going to be spread out if it's appropriated. It's not appropriated as of today.
Correct.
If the $130 million is appropriated, it'll come in over the next 5 years, which is estimated to be $20 to $25 million per year. But they have to have a plan in order to go forward with that, which is another reason we have the study committee proposed
All right.
And then there's a second piece of that. That 135 for Georgia accounts for, I think, 2.5 billion. There's another 5 billion of EV charging that is not allocated specifically to states, so Georgia can apply for that pieces of that 5 billion as well.
All right. I don't see any other questions from the committee members, so thank you for sharing with us, Mr. Smith.
Thank you.
Angela Holland, good to see you again. Welcome to the Regulated Industries Committee. I got you. Good job to do up here, man.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the warm welcome. I appreciate that. Members of the committee, appreciate you allowing me to come back again today. My name is Angela Holland. I serve as the president of the Georgia Association of Convenience Stores, and we represent large chains and small multi-generational businesses in urban and suburban and rural areas. This afternoon, after I testify, I have with me Ms. Haley Bauer of Clipper Petroleum, who also serves on our board of directors, to testify to the bill as well. Over the last couple of weeks, we've worked tirelessly with legislators, attorneys, lobbyists, and industry experts to arrive at a piece of legislation that would be satisfactory for all the parties involved. I feel like we've made a lot of progress on very specific language to resale power, and I'd like to publicly thank our utility friends for working so closely with us, considering our industry's needs and striving to create a partnership that will be successful in Georgia as our two industries collide. Daily, the 6,500 convenience stores in Georgia process over 6 million transactions, and annually they sell nearly 1.3 million gallons of fuel per location. Averaging one store every 9 square miles, adequately serving rural Georgia, convenience stores are specifically designed to accommodate drivers without disrupting street traffic. Although it doesn't seem revolutionary now, gas stations were the first commercial buildings set back from the street specifically to accommodate motorists, and by 1935, more than 200,000 gas stations dotted our roadways in the United States. For nearly 100 years, motorists have been refueling at gas stations and convenience stores, and it makes sense for the electric vehicle driver to search for fuel in the same place as a gas-powered engine driver searches for fuel. In the February 8th testimony before this committee, it was mentioned that there was an app available to show EV drivers where chargers are located. Because convenience stores are located on prime real estate on every major thoroughfare throughout Georgia, we're poised to be the leader for charging consumption to Georgia drivers without requiring them to utilize an app to search for fuel, whether they need petroleum or electricity. In fact, according to the Department of Agriculture, convenience stores in Georgia provide nearly 150,000 gas pumps for motorists. Making few modernizations to Georgia's current energy sales structure, you can create a framework that allows businesses to invest in installing EV chargers across this state. We believe the language in Senate Bill 492 could help eliminate customer range anxiety, bolster the electric vehicle market growth, and sales. But without a framework that makes sense, that includes some regulatory and statutory guidelines that provides our industry a level playing field, convenience store owners will continue to shy away from installing charging infrastructure, as would any small business entrepreneur. Every location in our industry competes on the same platform. When they're building a new location, they have to decide what model, what brand name fits that location best. And we have many choices in the fuel industry in which to partner. But when choosing an electric provider, a retailer has only one choice. They will have to provide electricity from the only utility in that area. And if that same electric provider is allowed to provide electric refueling stations anywhere they can find a parking space with ratepayer funds, asking the PSC to allow them to recover their costs by increasing monthly power bills to their customers, taking zero capital risks like the private sector will. They create and maintain a monopoly on the market, therefore stifling competition and the adoption in the industry. At the onset, this legislation was drafted to do three things: allow traditional retail entities to resell electricity to EV drivers, establish an EV business rate, and afford retailers the opportunity to sell electricity on a competitive and level playing field. Just like a three-legged stool that only offers support when all three legs balance the weight, Georgians and travelers are counting on you to create a strong foundation with all three legs, which will ensure that Georgia meets the traveling and commuting needs of the future. Leaving just one leg out risks us tumbling down. At this time, we've worked with other stakeholders, and I believe we are comfortable with the reselling of power and even on the creation of a business electric vehicle charging rate. However, there's one issue that we've not yet been able to bridge. So we've got two of the three legs. We just need that third one. The last issue in the current bill addresses is a level and competitive marketplace. As you know, the fuel industry is extremely competitive, publishing prices daily on the street for the motoring public to choose the product that best suits their needs. Electric companies, on the other hand, do not have to compete within their market territories. We determined early in this process that allowing choice in energy providers was just a bridge too far and not likely practical. But as such, we focused on ensuring a competitive and level a playing field as possible. Currently, utility companies rate base or cross-subsidize to the rest of their book of business, their charging infrastructure, creating a wildly unlevel playing field. None of their capital is at risk. And they cross-subsidize this to a larger pool of people, not just EV drivers using their services, allowing them to offer charging services at a much lower price, or allowing them to make significantly more profit for their reinvestment. We're not afforded those same opportunities. By creating a separate subsidiary to provide charging stations, the utility companies would be competing directly with convenience stores, and we welcome that competition into our market. We believe competition lowers prices for consumers, demands creativity in consumer offerings, and pushes owners and operators to provide the best services and options for their customers. Last weekend, I polled my members, and several of them are electrically ready to install EV chargers.
Okay.
We have members in Griffin, Macon, Peachtree City, Fayetteville, Fayette County, Metter, Brunswick, Port Wentworth, Pooler, Statesboro, Augusta, Savannah, Hardeeville, Chatsworth, Ringgold, Wildwood, Dalton, Rossville, Ackworth, Trenton, Lafayette, Adairsville, Rome, Calhoun, Crandall, Eaton, Flintstone, Villanova, Rocky Springs, Rocky Face, Tunnel Hill, Lookout Mountain, and Cassetta that are ready to get into the EV charging business. They've equipped their locations with electrical infrastructure to start placing chargers where they expect the highest demand, and right now they can't even sell electricity. But we must assume this list will grow exponentially when convenience stores have three firm legs on which to build an EV charging business. I've heard testimony from our utility partners who want to continue installing chargers in rural or underserved areas. But as of today, all of Georgia could be considered underserved. But by modernizing Georgia's electricity laws, the convenience store industry would be poised to fill in those gaps. I've provided a couple of maps. The first map clearly shows the electric company territories, and the blue dots indicate convenience store locations, while the second map indicates Georgia's population density, with convenience stores clearly dotted in red all over the state. Given the opportunity to resell power with a structured rate on a level playing field, this industry will be able to fill the gaps. We're all familiar with the old saying, if you build it, they will come. Convenience store owners have built it. They provide the fuel Georgians need. And if you grant us this legislation, they will build it for the next 100 years. And so we would like to respectfully, on behalf of the convenience store industry, ask for your support of Senate Bill 492.
Let me ask you a couple of questions, Ms. Holland. In one of the first map you showed us is the various EMCs. There are 42 different electric membership corporations and their territories. So you're saying you would welcome competition directly from Georgia Power as well as these EMCs?
Certainly, we'd welcome the competition into the marketplace.
What are you going to do if the EMCs are able to deliver it at a cheaper price than you are? Is that in this bill where they can't charge you more than they charge
the EMCs are not in this bill, and we feel like this is a framework to start down this road. Brand new collision of two industries. And depending on what happens into the future, we could possibly be back in this spot.
Well, I think they could snuff y'all out because they're not regulated by the PSC. They could charge anything they wanted to and open up chargers using this $135 million for starters and undercut your prices everywhere. This doesn't stop that from happening.
No, sir, it does not.
You still willing to take your chances? Just it gives you some relief with Georgia Power territories only?
Starts that framework, yes, sir.
Okay. Senator Gooch.
Following sort of in your line of thinking, I think what you're going to see with this GDOT money over the next 5 years, once the maps are created and the plans put forth and approved, it has to be approved by the Federal Highway Administration.
Mm-hmm.
That could take some time as well. So assuming everything goes forward, you may be starting to deploy some of this infrastructure next year in 23. Most likely that money will be kept in the right-of-way, like you were talking about with the gratuities clause. So you'd have them at rest stops, parking lots, somewhere along the corridors of your major interstates. And so most of those areas are covered by the EMCs if you look at the territorial maps that we have in front of us. But my question for you is, are your convenience stores, and I'm not sure if I'm clear on this, are your convenience stores prepared to pay for the upgrade of the infrastructure to bring these high voltage 3-phase charging stations to your properties? Today, you probably have a 3-phase service for your gas station, but with all the coolers and the pumps that are running, the air conditioners, you're probably close to max on your service line. So you would have to upgrade all of that, and that would be thousands of dollars alone. So you would pay for that, correct? You're not looking for the power companies to pay for that investment.
I believe part of that is in the make-ready infrastructure, but I know that we have members that have put up new builds, and they have paid for that because they've needed transformers for, the CNG portion of their business, their actual store, and for the electric vehicles, and they've backed that money themselves.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions from committee members? All right, thank you for testifying with us today. And Ms. Bauer, if you will, share your thoughts.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and committee members. Thank you for allowing me to speak to y'all today about my family's small business, our future in this industry, and how the resale of power is absolutely necessary for us and many like us to meet the demand of Georgians for electric vehicles, charging stations in each community in our state. My name is Haley Bauer, and I'm the Director of Marketing for Wholesale Fuels at Clipper Petroleum. Storytelling is a big part of our company and our culture, and so I can't talk about my family and our business unless I tell you the story of Clipper. Clipper was founded in 1933 and was originally founded as W.F. Homeyer Oil Company. Mr. Homeyer was lucky enough to go on an around-the-world trip on the famous Pan Am Clipper airplane. He was so impressed by the service when upon his return that he renamed the whole company Clipper Petroleum. My grandfather, who was an Amoco sales rep, purchased Clipper Petroleum in the early 70s with another Amoco sales rep, and that was his partner. In the early 90s, my grandfather and father bought out their partners, and my family and our team have been running and growing Clipper ever since. My sister Caroline and I are the next generation at Clipper Petroleum, and we will take the reins once our dad retires, if he ever does. And I hope he doesn't, because I love working with him. But my sister and I are the fourth generation of our family to be part of the petroleum industry. When my grandfather bought Clipper, we maybe had 30 sites that we supplied, none of our own. Today, we own and operate 27 convenience stores in Georgia and South Carolina, and we supply about 270 independent convenience store operators in the Southeast with fuel. Throughout Clipper's 88 years as an energy marketer, we have grown, adapted, and changed to better serve our customers and the communities that they live and work in. I spoke to the Small Business Committee last year about my family's business and was challenged to speak on the question, what keeps you up at night? For my sister Caroline and I, what keeps us up at night is the future of our industry and the shift to electricity and other alternative fuels. How do we adapt? How do we change? How do we remain relevant? How do we shift our business model to conform to the EV and alternative fuels future and still provide for the 300 plus team members that count on us to support them and their families? Just like the change in our cell phones, the change in internet, or the way we pay for things has changed tremendously over the past 30 plus years, my industry, the oil and gas industry, is changing too. An electric and alternative fuels future is upon us, and it's here to stay and is growing. I'm here today to tell you that our family business will survive. We will grow, we will adapt, and we will change. We are currently running at all new sites conduit for the installation of EV charging stations. We are also recommending conduit to be run at all of our customers' new sites. Our next step is to install EV charging stations. In order to do that, we need your help to be able to charge for the electricity that powers the equipment that charges the car on a level playing field with everyone in the market. We need the state's help in being able to resell power. We need a level playing field so we can be part of what should be a free market. Throughout the state of Georgia, there are over 6,500 convenience stores that compete to serve the approximate 6 million convenience store customers a day. Our industry has the real estate in place to help serve all of the communities in Georgia with charging stations at competitive prices. In order to be able to provide charging service to our customers, we need your help. Please allow us to be able to charge for the power provided to our customers on a level playing field. Thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate all that y'all are doing for our great state. In my opinion, small business is the true backbone of our economy, and we really need your help to ensure that we can provide charging stations for our customers in the future. Thank you again, and I'm happy to answer any questions that y'all may have.
All right, Senator Brass has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Haley, primarily where are y'all located? Where's Clipper?
We're in Metro Atlanta and North Georgia, and we have 2 stores in South Carolina.
Okay.
But as far as wholesale goes, I mean, we are in multiple states, Georgia, both of the Carolinas, Tennessee, Alabama, Florida.
Okay, so what part of Metro Atlanta are y'all? I'm just trying to, I'm looking at the map. I'm
Yeah,
just trying
I mean,
to get a feel for this.
The surrounding Metro Atlanta. I mean, we have a store at Perimeter, right across from Perimeter Mall, if y'all are familiar with that. I mean, yeah, Dallas, Paulding County. Yeah.
Wouldn't Perimeter, and somebody help me out on my geography, wouldn't Perimeter Mall kind of be in that MEAG?
That MEAG's really blue dots from, look down there, blue dots indicated convenience store. There's really a lot of white underneath that blue, lots of blue dots.
So that's not MEAG.
That's not really really bad coloring map. It's not.
Okay.
I'm colorblind, but I can tell.
Okay.
Mostly Georgia Power, I imagine.
Oh, MEAG's the light blue. Okay, I got it. Thank you.
Senator Gooch, you're recognized for question.
Yeah, and thank you for being here. Thinking long-term as these EV cars start to populate on our streets, there's a lot of other issues that come running through my mind we'll get to in a little bit.
Yes, sir.
How big are your typical lots on your C-stores? Acre and a half?
Yeah, it just depends. I mean, we're doing a more larger scale convenience store around like 5,000 square feet now. So we usually like to have a little bit more than, an acre and a half.
And your typical gas customer comes in, grabs a load of gas, goes in and buys a pack of cigarettes, lottery tickets,
Or food.
and takes off. How long does it take to fill up the car?
I mean, it shouldn't take more than, 5 minutes, definitely less, just a couple minutes. And if they choose to come inside, it's relatively quick, depending on if they don't want to come inside to sit down.
Right. So it just seems like these EV cars are going to take a lot longer to charge, 20, 30 minutes on the fast chargers.
Yes, sir.
Several hours on the slow chargers.
Yes,
So
sir.
You'll probably have to invest in the fast chargers.
Right.
But how many would you be able to accommodate on a typical acre and a half lot for a C-store today? Can you?
So I can
estimate that?
speak right now. We don't have any yet. As y'all heard me say, we're running the conduit at all of our ground up stores. But essentially, we would just install one charger. Again, just from a cost perspective, if you are not going ahead and running the conduit prior to building a new site, you have to break concrete. You probably have to install a new electric panel, potentially even a new transformer. So we are hoping at all of our new ground ups to do that. But essentially one or two. Again, the market is not a high demand for it right now. And I guess the whole, point of us trying to do this now is we're forward thinking.
Right. If the Biden administration gets their way, you'll be upgrading quick.
Yes, sir.
If their numbers are correct, by the year 2035, there'll be no more combustible engines. Is that?
That's
still
what
the
he's
target?
saying. I think it's a stretch a little bit, but that is definitely what the federal government is planning to do.
So we better get this right then.
Yes, sir.
This is important policy. Thank you
It's
for being
very
here.
important. And, again, like we want to adapt and change. We're not against this, and we know it's coming. And we just need to figure out a way to be fair and to help us to be able to shift. Right. We want to continue serving, our awesome, loyal customers and Georgians in particular. So.
I agree. Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Lucas, you got a question?
No, I think my questions have been answered.
All righty.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Now, we'll get back to you when you're ready to make comments later. I got a couple just bothering me.
Oh, yes, sir.
If you don't have but one charger, and it takes 20 minutes to 2 hours, you're not going to have 10 customers a day.
Yeah, well, we have to install the fast chargers at our station, which can charge up to 80% in 25 minutes. So one thing that we're doing, just so y'all know that we are really trying to shift with the EV coming, we are installing more food service options at our stores. So we are a Subway franchise and also a Bojangles franchisee. We also created our own proprietary food called Burrito Loco. And so we think that's something someone will come up to our store, charge their car, but they'll come inside to eat and hang out for the, 25 so minutes while their car is charging.
Okay. And what if you have, obviously if you got that many stores, you're in many different power providers' territories. What are you going to do when they all charge you different prices for their per kilowatt hour?
Well,
Not
I'm
regulated
hoping
in
that
most of the
we
states.
can get something passed so everybody will be, charging the same rate.
That's
And
not in this bill at all.
yeah,
And we currently don't have a regulatory body that sets rates for the vast majority of the state.
yes, sir.
Okay.
I
What is
honestly,
your-
I can't speak on that. I apologize. I really don't know what we'll do.
Okay. And what's your margin on fuel when you're selling gas? What's your profit margin on that?
I can't speak on that, but
Okay.
yeah, sorry.
All right. I'm gonna let you talk there, Luke. Tell them what you're thinking.
It's not what you think.
Go ahead, Senator Lucas.
Mr. Chairman, this is important, and I got, matter of fact, I got a call at 11 o'clock last night about it from somebody in rural Georgia, and they got a car dealership. And they're going to be required to have charging stations and everything. And he has a Ford dealership, so they're going to be required to do all of it. I represent Twiggs County, Hancock County, Wilkerson County. I don't have a raceway. I might have 1 or 2 convenience stores throughout the county. I understand that it's about money. It's about who provides the power. And we do have a utility that is ahead of the game as far as power and electric power. I really think that we need to do some studying on this and get it right, because I think there are options for independent folks as well as corporate folks in being able to work out something on these power stations. As the car dealer told me, he said, man, I $60,000 to $70,000, I just don't have it. Just spent the money just on inventory alone. It seems to me that if you got somebody who can already do it, you might be able to work out a better deal than trying to go get the stuff yourself to provide the power itself to these various cars. Because my understanding is you got a slow charge, then you got a fast charge. So the rates are going to be different. The charge per kilowatt hour is going to be different. I just think we need to get it right. And I just don't think we need to take this bill and rush it through.
All right. I noticed that Senator Gooch has introduced a joint study committee to look at some of these issues in more detail, and we'll see if you have an opportunity to vote on that one and might get us headed that direction. I got no further questions for you, but thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Giving us kind of boots on the ground viewpoint. Stephanie Grossman and Larry Legg from Georgia Power Company.
All right, well, good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you again today. It's been a few weeks. My name is Stephanie Gossman. I'm the Electric Transportation Manager at Georgia Power Company, and I have with me Mr. Larry Legg, who's the Pricing and Rates Director for Georgia Power. I will speak to electric transportation programs for Georgia Power as well as some of the market context, and Mr. Legg will be able to address any questions around rates and provide some comments there afterwards. So before getting into the EV charging details, I want to clearly state Georgia Power's position on this bill. Georgia Power supports the language on the sale of electricity by kilowatt hour and the requirement to file a tariff with the Commission as stated in this bill. We do not, however, support the other requirements of this bill and believe that removing the ability to rate-based public charging is not in the best interest of our rural and underserved communities at this time. In Georgia, we're certainly seeing an increased interest in EV adoption. We are, however, still behind the national average on EV sales, but we're still showing signs of progress in the next several years. In fact, the latest data shows that less than 0.5% of new vehicle registrations in Georgia were EVs. However, Georgia is thankfully already seen as a leader in publicly available EV charging, which is a key enabler for future EV adoption. It's important to note that all forecasts in growing EV adoption and charger availability are predicated upon a central role played by the utility, helping to provide that infrastructure first. And to quote a recent article from the AJC citing some data from a group called Atlas Public Policy Research Group, there are over 3,600 publicly available chargers in Georgia today, and it's estimated that nearly 18,000 will be needed by 2030 to meet the anticipated consumer demand for EVs. And although GDOT will receive $135 million through the infrastructure bill, It's highly unlikely that those funds will come close to installing even 1,000 more public fast chargers over the next 5 years that funding's available. In fact, it could take over $1 billion of investment by 2030 to meet the remaining anticipated Georgia EV public charging needs alone. Now, these 3,600 charging ports are installed and operated by many different EV charging service providers, including utilities, which represent a very small portion of the market available today. In fact, Georgia Power owns only about 3% of the share in the market today, a number which will shrink in the future as more investments come over several years, and we're pretty excited about that. I think we've heard that from others too. I mean, we're excited about the collaboration that can come. And the remaining 97% are owned by other charging providers such as Tesla, EVgo, Electrify America, Volta, and others that finance and subsidize these investments in various ways. In fact, Volta is perhaps the most interesting one to me because they offer free EV charging to drivers, and they place these chargers at many popular retail establishments already. Just recently, a few weeks ago, they announced a press release that they're installing more public fast chargers at Walgreens nationwide. They'll install at least 1,000 nationwide at Walgreens retail locations, and more will come. So to close the $1 billion investment gap and reach the estimated 2030 goal, we need everyone, public charging providers, electric utilities, convenience stores, and other retailers to be part of EV charging deployment. It is premature at this time to exclude the regulated electric utility programs like ours that represent less than 3% of the market. It would also be a disservice to Georgia's rural and underserved communities to exclude any program that's able to benefit them through this transformation that's happening across our state. And for this reason, we agree with portions of the previous testimony offered in front of this committee by Racetrack and Rivian that acknowledge there must be a focus on our rural and underserved communities, and in fact, sometimes granted some exceptions for programs like ours to be offered at this time. Unfortunately, this bill does not currently allow for those much-needed exceptions. So what is our Georgia Power program? Well, although we capture just 3% of the public charging market today, we're proud to be a small part of the solution in providing infrastructure because that's a significant barrier for consumer adoption. The infrastructure programs we're able to offer are critical for consumers to reduce costs for new technology adoption when it's still in its infancy, like EV charging will be for several more years. Georgia Power's community charging program fills a void to encourage drivers who want to purchase an EV by providing public fast charging infrastructure to help build range confidence while traveling throughout Georgia. And we currently own and operate 57 sites throughout the state through this program. And this legislation is currently written today to not allow us to maintain those in the future. This program began as a pilot in 2014, and it was later approved by the Public Service Commission in the 2019 rate case order, whereby we received $6 million over 3 years to invest in future public charging infrastructure. In the pilot stages, the program added chargers mostly in metro Atlanta areas, and since the 2019 rate case order, we've installed over 80% of new chargers outside of metro Atlanta. That includes areas such as Cleveland, Cornelia, Livonia, Trenton, Perry, Brunswick, Leesburg, Metter, Richmond Hill, and several more. And through this program, we are able to provide public fast charging solutions in areas where private sector investments simply can't justify at this time, and likely for several more years, especially our rural and underserved communities. We do this through working with our customers, including convenience stores, who want to attract EV drivers to their sites as part of enabling EV charging for their business as well as their communities. Examples of customers who ask to be part of this program include quick-serve restaurants, municipalities and cities, lodging, and many others, including 5 current sites at convenience stores, which equates to about 10% of our current sites today at convenience store locations. Now, while these locations are driven by our customers that want to host the chargers, they also must meet several standard criteria, including safety, accessibility, proximity to travel corridors, as well as other fast charging options. We have followed guidance from the Federal Highway Administration already to strategically locate fast charging sites along key corridors to enable long-distance EV travel throughout Georgia to hopefully build what we call range confidence to combat that range anxiety. To be clear, Georgia Power is in the business of providing safe, reliable, affordable, and clean electricity, and we do not have aspirations to be an EV charging business in the long term. However, in this market, there's a need for infrastructure investments today to help us get to where we need to go and where we see the potential for Georgia. We are uniquely situated as a regulated utility to be able to invest in our rural and underserved communities, so this technology will be accessible for all Georgians if or when they're ready for it. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak. I'm happy to take any questions.
I got a couple that are just sort of gnawing at me a little bit. Do you think the Territorial Service Act is even applicable to this usage of power? You've got the Territorial Service Act giving essentially monopolies within geographic areas where there are residences, there are businesses that were there, and these cars are like a swarm of locusts. They're going all over the place. They're not even from in this state. They're not identified with a specific location. Some are driving up and down 95 and 75. And why should that even apply to this particular usage of power?
So, did you want? I'll let Mr. Led go first if you'd like. Yeah.
Yeah, just to be clear, I'm not sure I understand exactly which portion of the Territorial Act that you're speaking about, but certainly as the territories are divided, we feel we're obligated to serve any that fall in our territorial. We have a requirement to serve anyone who requests service from us.
Okay, but you don't have a requirement, and none of the EMCs or other power generators have a requirement to provide charging stations for transient vehicles. It might be somebody who lives in Athens that drives to Atlanta to, where they buy their power for that car may have no relationship with where they live.
That's right. We don't have an obligation to build charging stations. We do have an obligation if a charging company wants to build a charging location in our territory and asks us to run service to us, then we're obligated. Yeah.
Am I right that the way our electric grid works, a power company, Cobb Power Company, could sell power to Brunswick, Georgia? I mean, it doesn't have to travel on your own lines, basically?
In areas where, if you're talking about on a retail basis, in areas where there's a competitive choice, there are certain exceptions to the Territorial Act where very large customers get a one-time choice of customer, then certainly utilities can compete for those loads. On the wholesale market, I would imagine, yes, that they could sell it as well to other entities on a wholesale basis.
Because I'm thinking you've got part of the rate structure that's regulated and part that's not. You're regulated.
Right.
You can only charge what PSC says you can charge.
That's right.
You got the EMCs that are not regulated. Some of them are in other businesses providing natural gas to people and other things. Why shouldn't they be able to sell to motorists in other parts of the state if they have excess power available? And I know that the network allows that transmission of power. It's not bound by geography like the customer bases that we've carved up are.
Right. Certainly, I would leave it to the EMCs to answer any questions about who they would choose to serve. But
do you care if they serve charging stations in your territory?
We do care. Yes, we feel we're obligated to serve the charging stations in our territory.
Okay. What if we relieved you of that obligation?
Well, then that would change the story.
So you'd be happy to have competition that might lower the prices for everybody?
I'm not saying that. I'm not here to opine on changing the Territorial Act. No, sir.
I just don't know. I don't know that I understand why it makes sense for this application. But Senator Ginn.
Mr. Chairman, I'm really intrigued by this question because anything that's over a 900 kW connected load is a customer choice load under the Territorial Act that was passed in 1973. And when you look at that, you put, say, half a dozen of these charging stations out there, you're over 900 kW connected load. So then it opens up a whole can of worms. Are we going to have different utilities coming in to provide power to these? And I'd love to hear, you would opine on that, I'd hope.
Right. There are certainly situations like that where we have competed for loads.
So if
yes.
there's say one of these convenience stores opens up 10, which would be a 350 kW a piece load, so that's 3,500 kW. You're telling me that y'all want to compete for that load throughout the state.
Right, and there are specific rules around that. I mean, certainly within captive areas, within city limits, even at the large load size, they're not competitive. There are some real specific technicalities to the Territorial Act that governs if a 900 kW connected load or larger is competitive or is not competitive. And that's not specific to just charging loads. That's any large customer. Certainly we compete with MEAG cities and EMCs across the state for new large loads all the time.
I guess I might clarify that. So you've got 10 350 kW chargers connected. You see that as a customer choice load?
Yes, we do.
I don't know how much power we're talking about that we anticipate is going to be used for these electric vehicles. Can you give us some concept of how many kilowatt hours you sell a year, or is there a way for you to gauge that, and what the anticipated demand will be from these electric vehicles?
The company sells in the neighborhood of 85 billion kilowatt hours a year. Georgia Power Company does. I mean, there are estimates. Certainly, different research groups, different think tanks have got low, medium, and high estimates of how many EVs they think may be on the road. So it would vary greatly across that spectrum. I don't know if you have any estimates.
No specific numbers to share in terms of what we've learned so far, but in terms of what a car battery can hold.
Right.
One of my cars, or both of my cars, I guess both of them are EVs, and they hold about 100 kilowatt hours worth of battery. But Mr. Legg, I think yours is 60?
I have a very old EV, and it used to hold 24 kilowatt hours. It probably holds about 18 now.
Not even 60.
After 7.5 years.
So it varies greatly.
Well, I'm fascinated. I mean, let's just say, I mean, now we're 1 or 2% of the vehicles are electric. What are we going to do when a third of them are electric and they're all gobbling up, 50 kilowatt hours a week times, God almighty, we got 11 billion people. What if we have 4 billion vehicles? I mean, I could see it being half of the power y'all generate being used to power vehicles, and I don't know where's that generation going to come from. Somebody's going to have to build some more plants somewhere, right?
Right.
We can talk about that Monday morning.
Right.
I just needed a little perspective because I think it's a potentially humongous problem, and I wonder the drain or the stress that will put on our power grid if we don't strengthen it or build it or increase the production. So, I mean, we may be shutting down factories and businesses and lights in people's houses so their cars can run if we're not careful here.
Right.
Texas is a great example.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Mr. Chairman. And the good news is Georgia has a robust planning process. In fact, Georgia Power has just filed its integrated resource plan, where every 3 years we go to the Public Service Commission and put forth a 20-year plan for how we plan to serve projected load over that period.
What did you project in that plan for electric vehicle power?
I don't know that off the top of my head. I'm not one of the experts in the IRP. I'm more on the rate case side, but we do have a projection in there for electric vehicle usage over that time horizon. And of course, that's generation planning, transmission, and distribution planning. All of those have to be planned for, and to your point, we have to make sure we're ready for that.
So right now, the way that construct works is you'll be spreading that cost of generating that power over your residential and commercial customers?
Yes, that's correct. And the idea, if I could really quickly, we talked earlier about demand rates and the rates that we charge for electricity. We've really got utilities really just have 3 cost buckets: customer-related charges like the meter on your house, the billing system we use to bill you with, the call center that you can call in and make inquiries. We've got demand-related charges. We've built power plants, we've built substations, we've built transmission lines. Customer and demand-related charges are fixed charges. We've already made the investment. They're there whether we sell a kilowatt hour or not. And then we've got energy charges, the kilowatt hour. You get a bill every month that shows you how many kilowatt hours you used. We had to burn fuel or produce electricity through solar panels or whatever to be able to produce that for you. So that's the variable piece, the energy. The customer and the demand pieces are the fixed charges, the infrastructure we would have to expand to meet that need. Those are real costs. We'd have to make sure that we recover those through our rates. And the idea is any rates that we design, not just for EV charging, but for any type of customer, has to recover the costs that are caused by that customer. And that's why those charges exist.
Okay. I'm gonna let you have a quick question, Chairman Gooch, and then we're gonna, we got the EMCs want to be heard.
Following up on the consumer choice issue that Senator Ginn talked about with the 900 kW, seems like that issue is dealing with connected load. So if those chargers are sitting idle and no one's using them, there's not a connected load. The only time there's a connected load would be when the car is actually plugged into it. So is it possible that wouldn't qualify at the PSC for consumer choice and that 900 kW?
Yeah, there's a specific definition in the Territorial Act for connected load, and the connection is the connection that the utility makes to the electric vehicle charging equipment and the capacity that's available there. So there's actually a case pending right now.
So that's being debated as we speak?
That's right.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you for sharing your expertise with us today.
Yes, sir.
Complicated subject matter. You were both wonderful.
Thank you.
All right. I've got Jeff Pratt from Green Power EMC, if I'm reading that right.
Mr. Chairman, committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Jeff Pratt. I'm president of Green Power EMC. That's an entity that's owned by the 38 of the electric cooperatives in the state, and so I represent them in speaking about this topic today. I'm going to try and answer a couple of the questions that you provided. I want to have a few opening remarks first, and about EV charging in the industry. Much like Ms. Gossman mentioned earlier, we're in a very critical time in this part of the business right now. In Georgia, cooperatives and utilities in general have seen a change in the way people use electricity over and over again throughout throughout my career. Even in our 85 years, you had wash machines, you had dishwashers, you had, of course, lighting, and in the last 50 or so years, air conditioning created a change in the way people use electricity. In the last 20 years, efficiency of appliances like your refrigerators have reduced the amount of energy in some cases that's being used by homes. So all these are changes in how people use electricity, and all of them are predicated on the changes in the appliances or energy using devices. And electric vehicles is going to be another one of those. We have managed that change over for many, many years, and will continue to. And we plan ahead to try and meet those changes. We didn't know exactly what air conditioner adoption was going to be like back, I can't tell you the number, 50, 60, 70 years ago, but we do now because we can look back and see it. EVs today are in their infancy. 40,000 plug-in vehicles in the state of Georgia out of about 8 million vehicles. We have a lot to see because we don't know how customers are going to respond and use them. And so when we think about those changes, we think about things like this disruption to not only convenience stores, utilities, and petroleum. I don't like this, that these industries are colliding. They're not. It's disruption across the whole industry. And when I think about that, I think of the other transitions that take place that are very important to Georgia because of the EV pieces. Economic development in the state is taking off because new car manufacturing, they aren't retooling Detroit facilities typically. They're building new ones to deal with EVs, and we're getting the windfall for that. And all of the ancillary businesses are coming. Large part of the reason that is important is because we have been a business-friendly state, including in making sure we don't make missteps in policy and public policy around EV charging, as an example. All of those things add into the whole opportunity for the state's growth. So there's a lot of intended and unintended consequences with public policy in this regard. Software industry is going to be a big part of the car business going forward. Not much less building engines, right? So just trying to give you an example of why I think that we are in early days. We don't know all of the unintended consequences of public policy, and in my mind, we have a lot of studying to do to figure out exactly what customers will want. Will they indeed, like many of us think, most of us like the convenience of charging at home overnight. Most of our cars are not being driven very many hours of the day. They have a lot, or night, and they have a lot of hours to charge slower. And so will that change the business, and what does that mean? So when I'm going in mentioning these pieces for is to try and make the point that public policy we make today, we don't want it to have unintended consequences for the broader picture of EV adoption, the EV industry, and where positioning of Georgia for in the economic development part of the business. So I will say it's my view, but in 5 years, many of the chargers that are installed in Georgia today will not necessarily be the place you'd want to go charge. Not because it's the place, but because of the charging technology that we put in. We're trying, the industry's trying to find charging technologies that will withstand a step of time. But I can tell you that we don't know what the manufacturers are going to require in 5 years. In fact, Mr. Legg's car probably has 50-mile range today, maybe 80 when you bought it new. The Nissan Leaf 5 years later doubled that. In 5 years after that, today you can buy a car with 500 miles of range. Now, you're talking about change and disruption to fueling, whether it's electricity or anything else. That kind of change is just starting. Right now, you can only buy a few kinds of cars on electric cars out there. In the next 5 years, and it'll be 5 years, but in 5 years, that's anticipated to triple or quadruple, including pickup trucks. So if you understand where I'm going here, I'm trying to say that in this infancy stage, we need all of the folks that we can participating, and we need to study it and make sure our policies really fit going forward, and that we don't have unintended consequences. Just a couple other pieces. I wanted to mention on the bill itself, one component that will withstand the test of time, I believe, and that is the sale for resale of electricity. That is important because even today, now, sorry, Mr. Legg, I'll pick on him again versus Ms. Gossman. If he plugs into a charger today and it charges at for 30 minutes, he's going to get about 10% of the electricity in that 30 minutes that Ms. Gossman will in her car, who charges much faster. That's just not good customer service, no matter who's providing the charging. We need to do the sales for resale and do it right. I think the language in the bill that's before you is correct and does narrowly define what sales for resale mean, and it's appropriate. That will withstand the test of time, and no matter what happens in the EV market. So I'm very excited about assisting and helping make that happen. Two more points here. So just to comment on the Territorial Act piece, and there is a dispute out at the PSC today. It was mentioned earlier about whether or not a charger is indeed the load, or whether the cars that plug into the charger is the load. And that would Senator Gooch really define whether or not, once that decision's made through the appropriate process, that'll really decide whether there's an exception to the Territorial Act in choice of suppliers. That will, it's going to take a while to bear out from experience, but it's happening. It's not unlike, to give you an example, in a manufacturing facility, you have the same issue for a forklift. So you have 5 forklift chargers, or do you count how many forklifts? You have 2 forklifts and 5 chargers. Is the load the forklifts or the chargers? So I just bring that up, that there is limited amount of case law out there to help define that, and that's what PSC is working to do. I would say that that we talked about co-ops and what their interest is in charging in general. While they're not regulated by the Public Service Commission, they are regulated by the members in which they are served and their financing authorities, including most of them the Rural Utility Service in Washington, D.C. Their regulation is done by the folks who pay their bills, the elected, Democratic elected folks that pay their bills. So there is regulation. It's just a different form of regulation. Just wanted to make that point. I think that when I think of this topic, I'll just have to tell you the co-ops are excited to work with all of our key customers. Whoever wants to sell electricity to charge cars, we want that to happen. We, in general, don't want to provide retail charging services for somebody who charges for 30 minutes. We have a few chargers at some of our offices for customer awareness, to help them understand how charging works, and for some of our fleet vehicles, right, to self-charge some of our own facilities. But we really don't think it's convenient for folks to spend 25 minutes sitting in the parking lot or coming in asking for a cup of coffee in the office. It's just not the right place. We're not in the business of doing that well. I think the convenience stores are in a good place to do that. But in rural areas, we think there may be an opportunity for us to fill in some gaps in the short term to get us from 40,000 vehicles to 400,000. That's still 5% of the Georgia market. And that's going to take several years for us to ever get there, probably 10, okay? And so we have some time. I would just like to say my thoughts are sales for resale makes a lot of sense, but let's study and make sure we get the rest of it right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, let me get a couple things straight from you. Do any of the EMCs have charging stations where they charge customers for the electricity?
Yes, sir, they do.
Okay.
They charge by time, because that is the convention in the state. Even though I suppose they could sell the electricity because they are under the Territorial Act, they are retail suppliers, so they can do that. Where when they charge by time.
Okay.
Just because that's what everybody does. Not trying to game that part of the system.
But you would be permitted to, as this market grows and you see a potential to service your areas, to put out charging stations and charge by the kilowatt to whoever driver comes up and plugs in.
We could, and we certainly could do that. Again, we'd much rather sell the power to somebody else who'll provide that service. We will provide power to the home, and the customer can provide themselves that service. But we're not excited about building facilities that will host 20 cars and people, and we aren't very good at selling the food and what have you that the lady from Clipper mentioned. We're just not very good at that.
If you wanted to do it, you could charge whatever price per kilowatt hour your board authorized, correct?
No, that's a good question. That's true, but we are limited in that those rates have to be non-discriminatory. We could not charge something to we could not charge something to one customer that for a service that's different than a similar customer providing the same service. So
what prohibits that?
It's a part of the Territorial Act that says that we cannot be discriminatory in our rate making practices.
Okay.
Very fundamental piece. And on top of that, Mr. Legg said this pretty well. Our rate making practices as utilities, but especially co-ops, since we are a zero-sum game, we don't make profit. It's very important for our co-ops to find and look at what caused the fixed cost and the energy cost, and create rates that recovers those costs from the entities that create those costs. Okay. And so what we don't want to do is cross-subsidize between different classes. It's an art, but that's exactly what our goals and what we try and attempt to do.
All right, so it sounds like you're not particularly interested in selling direct to automobile consumers. You're not good at doing that. You've admitted you didn't want to go there. So would you agree that we need to allow the reselling of power by somebody else to service our population? If the EMCs and Georgia Power aren't going to do it, don't we need some either convenience stores or businesses maybe will spring up? Just that's their job, charging businesses.
Absolutely think that we have every intention to help them be successful with that, but not at the cost that it might have to other customers. But if, for example, in rural areas, that investment doesn't get made, and it's important to our local customers in those rural areas to have this service, and our board says, let's provide that service because these rural areas need it. If it's not getting invested by others, much like broadband, then we will feel like we need to provide that service, not because we love getting into the business. It's because our customers want us to be a part. They demand. If they want. One time we were in the appliance business. We weren't in the appliance business because we thought we would make money. We got in the appliance business because nobody else was selling them, and customers wanted them, and we had to help customers understand, believe it or not, how to use an electric stove, how to use a washing machine, and that was just a part of our business. But today, no EMC sells appliances in the state of Georgia anymore, and the reason is there are very highly qualified folks that do it very well, and that's just we were an enabler, not a
convenience stores out there are real good about selling fuel.
Yes.
Of gas, and so they'll probably be able to convert and do this.
Yes.
So I'm trying to figure, are you envisioning a future where there will be retail sellers, resellers of electricity in competition with the various electricity generators?
No, I don't think so. I think that our utilities will sell electricity on a retail basis to a group of folks who have own chargers that will resell it and provide services to those customers, including fueling their cars.
Okay.
I think that's where we'll be.
And you mentioned that there is part of this bill that you do think is necessary.
That's the sale for resale, just what you're referencing there, the ability to giving anybody who owns a charging station the ability to resell the electricity that we retail to them and mark it up, whatever they can do in the market, to cars that, to customers who want to refuel their car, right, and meter that energy and sell it based upon the volume of electricity, just like a gallon of gasoline versus time.
And so you would like to see that portion of this bill go ahead and go forward, and let's get that out of the way?
I'd be fine with that. If it'd be okay. I think we have time if we put it and studied it, but we would not be opposed as long as the language is like it is in the bill today. As long as we don't change that, then I think it works just fine.
Okay, so you didn't mark on this sheet whether you were speaking for or against the bill. I've heard some comments from you that you don't think we're ready to do this without thorough study, and I just heard you say, yeah, let's go for it. Are you in favor or against this bill?
I'm in favor of that component of the bill. We're somewhat neutral on the other pieces. We're not. The bill currently does not have us in the co-ops as being affected by the other components, so we're neutral on those points.
All right, I think I had Senator Brass recognized first, but I'm gonna get back to you there, Mr. Whip.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That sale resale piece, which part is that in the bill? What lines? Do you know?
Oh, gosh, I don't have it in front of me.
mean,
Somebody can,
can I give him a copy?
Section 1 can help you with that. It's a code reference more than anything.
And then follow up, Mr. Chairman.
Go right ahead.
All right, and so Stephanie had mentioned some parts that she or Georgia Power supported as well. And I think you had mentioned something about tariffs that portion you did support. Is EMC for or against neutral?
Neutral on the way the bill's written on that component.
If y'all were not carved out, would you be for or against?
Against.
You'd be against that
Yes.
piece. Okay, but Georgia Power is for. All right, yeah, never mind. My plan's out.
Very creative thinking.
You were going down the same rabbit.
Senator Gooch.
He asked the question, I was going to ask the gentleman, if you were no longer carved out, would your neutral position change? And you said obviously it would.
Obviously it would.
Thank you.
Yes.
All right. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Well, Senator Lucas, you've made it clear you're not ready to vote on this issue yet. Anybody else here want to have a vote today?
Make a comment. if I
Senator
could.
Gooch, you're recognized.
So, I've learned a lot just in the 2 hours we've been here, which piques my interest even more, and I'm convinced as much, if not more than ever, that this industry's coming to us, and it's coming fast, like a locomotive train, and we better get the policies right, and I don't know that you'll get it all done in the next 10 days. But we got a lot of issues. We heard issues about projected loads. We heard issues about sale and resale, the territorial acts, the issue over at the PSC, which is still under investigation. But we also have issues with our DOT, the money that's coming from Washington, if and when it gets appropriated. It's not appropriated yet. We could see $135 million over the next 5 years. A plan has to be implemented on that. A lot of that plan could be dictated on what we do in this law going forward. But the biggest issue that we haven't really drilled down on yet, and we've talked about it in transportation now for about a year, and that is, how do we fund our DOT projects going forward? How do we take that gas tax on gasoline and diesel, which is approximately 55 cents per gallon, convert it to a kilowatt rate or some excise tax or some EV charge per kilowatt, and how do we collect that money? How do we get it to DOT? How do you collect it at the home in the charging stations that are hooked up in your garage? How do you get it on tourists that are driving through Georgia? All these shopping centers, rest stops, the whole gamut. It's going to take some careful thinking and a lot of policy changes to get there. Do we do it on a VMT, which is a vehicle miles traveled kind of fee, or do you try to establish a flat fee on every car that's on the roads in Georgia, which if they're not titled in Georgia, you're not going to collect that money either. If it's a small car like a Tesla or a Toyota Prius or whatever the electric cars of today are, currently we charge $200. That fee was created in 2017 or in 2015 in House Bill 170. We never anticipated big trucks being battery operated at the time. Some of these trucks are anticipated to travel 50,000 or more miles a year. $200 isn't going to touch what the gas tax or the equivalence of the diesel tax would be. My point is, we really need to spend the summer and the fall looking at all of these issues in a comprehensive approach. And that's why the study committee resolution was dropped a few weeks ago. It's still in the Rules Committee. We need to push that on over to the House because it is a joint study committee. So regardless of what action we take on this bill, we still need that study committee to pass, and I would hope that we would slow down and look at all of these issues carefully over the summer and the fall with your leadership and Senator Ginn's leadership on that committee.
Any committee members like to take a vote on this issue today? No. Would you like? Yeah, we got a quorum. Okay, well, given that, then I think if I'm doing my math right, even if all the members that are in other committees testifying now were here and all were in favor, this wouldn't pass. I'm looking at about 4 or 5 empty chairs, 6 people here, 7 people here. Anybody else want to be heard? We're that have a point that they didn't hear made to help educate us, guide us. But I have limited committee meetings left. In the Senate, we have to be reported, bills have to be favorably reported out of committee before we gavel in on Wednesday of next week, the 9th, in order to get on the rules calendar before crossover day. So that gives us only 2 additional meetings. I might have mentioned earlier we have a reserve the room on Monday morning. Is it 10 or 11? 10 a.m. We have it for 2 hours. And of course we have our standard meeting next Tuesday. That's at 3 p.m. But there's a whole bunch of other committees. That's a more finite time period. My thinking is I have tentative plans. I haven't talked with you, Senator Brass. If you have your folks lined up or able to testify on the ticket scalping bill, we could talk about that one. I know you might call it something different.
Call it ticket freedom.
The protection of fans or whatever. And I have assured Senator Hufstetter we will have a follow-up meeting on his Rate Reduction Act securitization type bill. I'm going to handle that on Monday. I'm trying to save time Tuesday to deal with the COAM bills. We have 2 different COAM bills here, and if I can find time to deal with those on Tuesday. And then there's only a couple other bills in the committee that I don't know that we have time to delve into in full detail, but there's some I've got to circle back up with some of the authors and see if they want them. So just to educate my audience, that's probably where we're going, is be prepared if you want to be heard on the securitization. I'll just call it Bill Senator Hufstetter. It's 421, or the craft beer 420. What's your number on? You don't know your bill by number. The love the fans bill, and be prepared on that. And if you want to be heard on COAMs, Tuesday would be our opportunity for that. And with that, we're adjourned for the day. Everybody have a splendid weekend.